Hi folks, and welcome back. In the last couple of videos, we spent some time developing the concept of obstetric violence, looking at exactly what this is, and thinking about oppression in systemic terms, what it means. We explored what it means to think about oppression in systemic terms. In this video, I'm going to start bringing some things together. We're going to talk about the relationship between obstetric violence as a form of gendered violence, gendered shame, and misogyny or misogynistic violence. And I'm going to be drawing on the ideas from the last video, but here I'll be developing an analysis of a particular gendered form of systemic oppression and systemic violence that goes along with it. So just a quick refresher. Obstetric violence is disrespectful, abusive, and neglectful treatment by health providers during the provision of health care related to pregnancy, childbirth, and the postpartum period in both public and private settings. Obstetric violence runs the gamut from physical abuse, humiliation or verbal abuse, coercive or unconsented practices, refusal of treatment or admission to a health facility, unnecessary use of medication, failure to maintain confidentiality or obtain informed consent, detention in facilities for failure to pay, discrimination based on race, ethnic or economic background, age, HIV status, gender nonconformity, etc., etc. And so it's essentially violence committed against women in their capacity as pregnant and birthing mothers and in the postpartum period. And it is according to the authors of the piece that we read, a kind of gendered violence. It is committed against women because they are women, not just incidentally. So what we're going to try to unpack here is how we should understand obstetric violence as a form of gendered violence. And in order to do that, I'm going to start by discussing the concept of patriarchy. Now, I'm going to be drawing a lot here on the work of a philosopher named Kate Manne, who's a philosopher at Cornell University, and she published a few years ago a book called Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny. And in this book, she develops an account of misogyny in relation to accounts of patriarchy and sexism. And what I'm going to develop here is a sketch of the account that she gives. The first thing I want to note here is that you'll see where I have patriarchy listed at the top of this slide, I refer to it as cis-normative, heteronormative, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy. This is just a reminder that we are engaged in and need to be engaged in a kind of intersectional analysis here. Patriarchy is one dimension of this system of oppression, but the way that patriarchal norms are experienced, the way that they shape behavior, and the expectations that they place on individuals is going to be determined by where those individuals find themselves with respect to these other dimensions of oppression. The way that a white woman experiences patriarchy is different than the way that a black woman experiences patriarchy. The way that a trans black woman experiences patriarchy is going to be vastly different than the way that a trans white woman or a white trans woman experiences patriarchy. So these norms don't, these systems of oppression don't stand on their own. They intersect with one another and have compounding and complicating effects when these normative systems overlap. But we're going to, for the most part, abstract away from those complications, just so that we can get a grip on this this idea of a system of patriarchy and understand how a system of oppression can be unpacked or analyzed here. But we have to always keep in mind that there are these complicating intersectional factors that we need to return to once we have this analysis in hand. So what are we talking about when we talk about patriarchy? Well, one thing we might mean is that is what the term has meant historically. That is, a system of social organization that explicitly advantages men. A patriarchal system is one where men play a central organizing role. They have explicit advantages in that system. Property and wealth accrue to men. Power accrues to men within a patriarchal system. But we don't need to have such an explicit structure in order to refer to a system as patriarchal. For our purposes, we're going to say that a system is patriarchal if it is a system of implicit and explicit norms that structure social, economic, and institutional relationships in a way that on the whole advantages men and disadvantages women. Now, it's important to note that that does not mean that men are not also sometimes harmed by patriarchy, especially at some of these intersections. Patriarchy may harm black men, certainly harms trans men, and trans women, certainly harms gay men, in particular ways that it does not harm white cis hetero men. So we shouldn't fall into the trap of thinking that patriarchy can only exist if all men benefit by it, or if men are never or that men are never harmed by it. They are, but it's exists when, in general, men in positions of power and privilege are experiencing do experience the benefits of this system, while women, especially those who are oppressed in other ways, bear the burdens and costs of this system. So that's what we're going to be focusing on, a system of implicit and explicit norms that structure social, economic, and institutional relationships. Kate Manne thinks of patriarchy on analogy to an economy. And so we can start by just asking, what is an economy? Well, in the most general sense, an economy is a mechanism for the distribution of resources. We can have various kinds of economy. We can have a market economy that distributes resources on the basis of who can pay for those resources. We can have a command economy that distributes resources on the basis of the rules set by some central organization, by some central committee that determines how those resources are going to be distributed. But the idea of an economy is just the idea of some mechanism for distributing scarce resources. So what are the resources that the economy of patriarchy distributes? Well, according to Manne, these are social, moral, and emotional goods and services. These are goods and services produced by the people who are a part of this economy, the services that are given or proffered by the people who are part of this economy. And they are social goods in the sense, or goods and services like caretaking, like maintenance of the family. They're moral goods like the moral education of children and the passing on of cultural norms. And they're emotional goods and services like caring for the emotional well-being of children, of men, of friends, of relatives within a community and within this economy. And Manne notes that these goods and services are gender-coded. There are some services, goods and services that women are expected to provide and that men can claim from them, and some goods and services that men are expected to provide and that women can claim from them. As she puts it, he is entitled to and can take feminine goods from her. She is entitled to and can claim masculine-coded goods from him. Now, there's an important asymmetry to note here. He is entitled to and can take feminine-coded goods from her. It's part of the system of patriarchy that men can not only feel entitled to these goods and services, but can demand them and physically take them when they are not provided, or when they are withheld from him. She, on the other hand, is entitled to and can claim masculine-coded goods and services from him. That is, she can't take them. She can't physically take these goods and services from him, but she does have a claim to them. She can complain when he fails to live up to these masculine ideals. She can rightfully feel aggrieved about his failure to do so. So she has some claim to them, but she can't take them. If she does try to take them, as we'll see, she'll herself be in violation of some norms of patriarchy. So what are these masculine-coded goods and services? Well, this is pretty obvious, I think. The masculine-coded goods and services are things like protection, money, handiness, security, strength, power, assertiveness, decisiveness, leadership, these things that we expect of men in a patriarchal society. A good man, a good husband, a good partner is supposed to be one who protects his spouse, who provides for her, who can take care of her, who is decisive and makes the decisions for the family and takes a leadership role. Those are the masculine-coded goods. The feminine-coded goods, they're the caretaking goods. Physical care like nursing, cooking, cleaning. Emotional care like supporting, soothing, and smoothing social transactions. Sexual gratification and reproduction are some central feminine-coded goods. So how does this economy maintain itself? Right? It's not that we have explicit rules that say women have to provide these services and men can take them from women, and we have explicit rules that say men have to provide certain services and women can claim them from men. It's much more subtle than that. It's sustained by a system of implicit and explicit social norms. So let's take a minute to think about what a norm is. A norm is simply a pattern of behavior. At root, it's just that we behave in a particular way, on the norm. On average, we behave in a particular way in particular circumstances. But it's not just that. It's that we behave in a particular way and we form mutual expectations about one another's behavior. That is, I behave in this way in these circumstances and I expect that you will behave similarly in similar circumstances. I form expectations about how you're going to behave. And along with these expectations, I have a habit of censoriousness. When you violate the expectations that I have for your behavior, I will sanction you for those violations. So everyone expects everyone else to conform to these patterns of behavior, conforms to these patterns of behavior themselves, and importantly is prepared to sanction those who fail to conform. That's what it is for a norm to exist. We have patterns of behavior, we have expectations about those patterns of behavior, and we have willingness to sanction, preparedness to sanction those who violate our expectations. And it's that that creates social norms. It's that cluster of ideas that is the idea of a social norm. So patriarchy, according to Manne, is this system, according to Kate Manne, is this system of social norms that constructs this economy where there are certain gender-coded goods and services that women are expected to provide to men, and men can take from women, and certain masculine-coded goods and services that men are expected to provide to women and that women can claim from them. Now, the roles that men can claim and the services that they provide tend to be much more highly regarded in a patriarchal society. They are the ones that are deserving of economic remuneration. They're the ones that are prized in the public sphere, whereas the roles and goods and services of women tend to be ones that are prized in the private sphere, but that are not remunerated, that are not considered worthy of praise or worthy of reward. They are, in a sense, a kind of second tier of goods and services that women are expected to provide. Now, this system of norms according to Manne, this system of patriarchal norms according to Manne, is paired with a kind of law enforcement branch. Misogyny, she says, is the law enforcement arm of patriarchy. So misogyny, misogynistic violence, is violence not just directed at women, and not directed at women because men hate women or have some deep-seated hatred for women. Rather, it's violence directed at those who violate the norms of patriarchy. Women who are in violation or are in risk of violating the norms of patriarchy are women who will go on to experience misogynistic violence. The aim of misogyny is to enforce compliance with those norms. So it's the sanctioning action, it's the censoriousness, it's violence directed at women in particular, but also sometimes at men, in particular gender non-conforming men, but at those who violate the norms of patriarchy. Now, misogyny exists on a spectrum from the subtle to the extreme. Right? Some forms of misogyny are quite extreme. Things like domestic abuse, domestic violence, strangulation, things like mass shooting or shooting rampages that are rooted in grievances that one is not receiving the attention of women that one thinks one deserves, or one thinks one can claim from them. These are forms of misogynistic violence, but misogyny can also be much more subtle. We can see misogynistic violence in speech. We can see misogynistic violence in more subtle forms of mistreatment of women who are in violation of these norms of patriarchy, or the norms of the patriarchy. There are also norms of misogyny that we need to attend to. Right? There are a second layer of expectations at play here. We sanction those who don't properly sanction others for violating the norms of patriarchy. If someone doesn't keep, an example here might be better. Think of a case where a guy is given a hard time for letting his partner or spouse make decisions for him, right? That he's on a short leash, that he needs to keep his woman in line, that he needs to stand up to her, right? He'll be razzed by his friends. He'll be sanctioned by his friends for not asserting himself in the dominant male role in the relationship and sanctioning her violation of the norms of patriarchy that say that she ought to be submissive to his will. That is what I have in mind, what we should have in mind when we think about these norms of misogyny, that one can be sanctioned for failing to sanction misogynistic behavior, or failing to sanction behavior that violates these norms of patriarchy. Now, this is really important. This is really important because this gives us a glimpse into how these systems can perpetuate themselves, even when individuals within these systems tend to think that the system is broken or problematic, or that these norms ought not to be enforced, or at least have no stake in trying, or don't see themselves as having any stake in trying to enforce these norms. They feel social pressure to continue enforcing these norms. And so even if people within the system don't have attitudes that seem to fit with the system or accord with the system, they can still perpetuate this system simply by reacting to social pressures that they feel to perpetuate the system. And they may not even recognize they're doing so. And this is really, I think, a deep insight into how these systems of oppression exist apart from the attitudes of the individuals who make up these systems, and how they perpetuate themselves through time. So we don't just have the law enforcement arm of patriarchy, misogyny. We also have an ideological arm of patriarchy, and Kate Manne calls this ideological arm sexism. Sexism does the quote-unquote intellectual work of the patriarchy. It's the work of justifying and reinforcing patriarchal norms. It's the creation and circulation of memes, and by memes I don't just mean the things you see on Twitter. I mean social memes, as in repeated forms, or forms of behavior that are repeated, or forms of language that are repeated over and over and over again in our society, that become normalized. The repetition of historical and biological facts to justify oppressive systems is a kind of sexism. The idea that women are weaker, that men are naturally more assertive, the idea that because women bear children, they are not as they are better suited as caregivers, and because men don't, they are better suited for the workplace. Right? These sorts of historical and biological facts that are used to justify oppressive systems, that's an act of sexism, according to the way that Kate Manne wants to carve up this conceptual space. So we've got patriarchy as the system of norms, we've got sexism as the ideological arm that reinforces this system of norms, and we've got misogyny as the law enforcement arm that sanctions violations of these norms. So here, break that down. We've got patriarchy as the system of norms, sexism as the ideological arm that reinforces, and misogyny, the law enforcement arm that sanctions violations. So what's all this have to do with obstetric violence? We've got now this analysis of a system of oppression, a system of gendered oppression in this case. What's all this have to do with obstetric violence? Well, according to the authors of the piece that we read, obstetric violence is a form of gendered violence. We now have the tools to unpack what this means. Obstetric violence can be understood as an act of misogyny. Pregnant women and birthing women have violated or are in violation of certain norms of patriarchy, and they are being sanctioned for being in violation of those norms. What are the norms that are being enforced, or what are the ways in which they're violating norms of patriarchy? Well, pregnant women are doing something that seems entirely natural and seems entirely womanly, right? They're giving birth to a child. They're carrying and giving birth to a child. They're doing the reproductive work of the human species. But in doing that, they are exhibiting a kind of raw powerfulness that women are not supposed to exhibit according to the norms of patriarchy. So they are sort of oxymoronically in violation of the norms of patriarchy in doing precisely what patriarchy wants them to do. Also, the process of giving birth is one where the woman's body is doing something incredibly powerful that women's bodies aren't supposed to be doing, and so they're in violation of these norms of patriarchy. Birthing is also loud and kind of messy, and women's bodies are not supposed to be loud and messy. They're supposed to be quiet and subdued and clean. And women who want to be active participants in the birthing of their child, who want their interests cared for, who want to have some control over the situation, who want to consent to each act done to them, who, and these are all reasonable things to want to do, we should note, who want their pain cared for, are also treated as too self-centered, because from the perspective of patriarchy, this is supposed to be about the child. They're supposed to be mothers at this point, and they're supposed to put the interests of the children first. So we can start to see a number of ways in which the very process of pregnancy and childbirth is paradoxically in violation of the norms of patriarchy. So let's use the lens we've just developed now to work through this in a bit more detail, right? So patriarchy places all sorts of expectations upon women, but the ones that are relevant here, I think, are these: that women are expected to provide sexual gratification to men. It's a central role of women in patriarchy. Women are, so they're expected to appear beautiful, appear attractive to men, and provide sexual gratification for men. They're expected to provide and care for children. And as mothers, they're expected to put the needs of their children first. We see this enforced or reinforced through sexism in ideals of beauty and femininity that are widely spread and reproduced in our culture, through the idea that women shouldn't let men see anything unattractive that their bodies do. That should all be hidden from men's view. They should only be in public. They should be on display at all times. They should make their bodies appear attractive at all times. Women should be ready for motherhood at any time. The authors call this the ideal of intensive motherhood, that from the very first visit to a gynecologist, women are being prepared for motherhood. I actually think it starts even earlier than that. Women are being given, dolls and cooking, dolls and toy kitchens to play in, to prepare them for the role of motherhood. And then they are, from their first gynecological visits, being prepared for this role of motherhood. They're told to be taking folic acid just in case they become pregnant, because they might become mothers at any time, and they are taught constantly to put the needs of their children first and foremost before their own needs. And by the time they enter into motherhood, it is made central to their identity. This is the idea of intensive motherhood. And women are taught to feel shame, a particular kind of gendered shame, for violating these norms, for not appearing beautiful or feminine enough, for not making themselves up before appearing in public, for not being as committed to the motherhood role as their culture tells them they ought to be. And many of these norms are violated during pregnancy and the act of childbirth, or the process of childbirth. Women do, in that case, let men see some sort of unattractive or unclean images of their body. We saw this in the text when, for example, one woman said she was opting for a C-section, or would opt for a C-section, because she doesn't want her husband to see what happens to her vagina when she has a child, or she doesn't want to take the risk of defecating on the birthing table during the process of childbirth. These are things that happen. They're totally natural, but they're things that patriarchal norms say women ought to hide from men. This isn't something that should happen out in the open. And they are also in violation of norms of intensive motherhood if they put their own interests first in any way. If they worry about their own pain, if they worry about what's happening to their body rather than what's happening to the child, they are in violation of these norms of intensive motherhood. So we see that then obstetric violence is aimed at controlling women and their bodies. It is aimed at controlling these and sanctioning these violations of the norms of patriarchy. And moreover, it's rarely reported because women themselves feel shame for violating these norms. So we see now that gendered shame plays a dual role here. Gendered shame can give rise to, in one sense, these forms of gendered violence, reinforce these forms of gendered violence. It's why doctors may feel compelled to or comfortable enforcing the norms because the women themselves feel shame. And they hide the fact that obstetric violence happens because women will not report it if they feel shamed for the things that their bodies do during pregnancy and childbirth. So we've now got this account in hand. We've got this idea of obstetric violence as a kind of gendered violence, as in fact a kind of misogynistic violence aimed at enforcing the norms of patriarchy that women and their bodies violate when they are pregnant and in the process of giving birth. So that's where I'm going to end.